Genesis chapter 30 this morning, in Genesis chapter 30. Mark's away from us this week, but dive in with us as we look at this text together. In this section of Genesis, we have the family of Jacob being laid out for us, and the strife that we see in his family really through the first 24 verses. In chapter 20, in verse 25, we see Jacob desiring to take his family and return to his land, to the land of his fathers, to his own country. And Laban was resistant to allow Jacob to go, so Jacob lays out for him this plan that would be his wages. And the wages that Jacob would receive were this. He said, let me pass, verse 32, let me pass through your entire flock today, removing from them every speckled and spotted sheep, and every black one among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and such shall be my wages. In addition to that, to kind of separate the flocks, they removed them from one another some 3 days' journey. But Jacob devised this plan where he set up these fresh rods of poplar and almond and plane trees and peeled white strips in them. And he would cause the flocks to pass before them, and especially those that were strong when they were mating. And as a result, his flocks increased until we get to the end of chapter 30, and it says, so the man became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks and female and male servants and camels and donkeys. Austin, what do you see in this text?
I wanted to think about the folly of trying to work outside of God's realm and begin doing things on our own. Here in verse 1 it says that Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, and she envied her sister. That's a really bad place to start when you envy what someone else has. And so she goes to Jacob, she cries out, and she says, give me children or I'm going to die. And Jacob is a little understandably angry. He says, I'm not God. I'm not the one who has closed your womb. And so she comes up with this plan. She says, well, take my maidservant Bilhah and let her bear children for you, for me. And that's exactly what happens. The problem is that leads to more and more strife in the family of Jacob. And Leah does the same exact thing. She takes her maidservant, she gives her to Jacob, and she bears more children for him. And then there's more strife in the family, like David said in the first 24 verses. That's what we see over and over again. We're going to see that over and over again in the family going on through Genesis. And so I think one of the points that we can see here is that when we try and take matters into our own hands, usually bad things happen. And so for us, we need to learn how to trust in God, trust in His plan, and not take matters into our own hands.
Amen. Well, I want to take another application from this scenario given in the first 24 verses where we see all this strife, we see all these making of your own plans. And really what we see is when we ignore God's instructions for the family, often strife is the result. And I want to really make 2 points from that. First of all, I just kind of want to point out Jacob's passivity, his failure to lead. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 23, we're told that the husband is to be the head of the wife. And the idea of the head is not so much the idea of authority, even though that is implied in the term, but it's leadership, direction. And Jacob is to direct his family, but oftentimes he seems to be so passive when his wives come up with these various plans. But I want us to also just simply challenge us with that concept. As husbands, we need to lead our families, give them direction, give them leadership. We need to be the ones to come up with the ways to solve the problems that come up in our lives with always on the eyes on God's instruction and God's will. The second thing is just notice the dysfunction. We have this dysfunctional family, and it's not surprising because that's the atmosphere in which Jacob grew up in. Often the fact is how we rear our children, the type of home environment that we have, often influences the environment they create in their own house. So be careful with how you interact with your wife and the environment you set for your children. We want their environment to be godly and God-fearing and to be wholesome and healthy. So just as a warning for us as we go forward. So that's Genesis chapter 30. Thank you for joining us today. If you got any comments or any things you see in this text, put them in the comments below. We'd love to see those things and be encouraged by them. Thank you for joining us. Hope